everyone, Sarah here. Rewind Justice brings you revenge stories that will blow your mind. If you're ready, hit subscribe and let's go.
My name is Caroline Thompson, and for 7 years, I've been the family disappointment. The one who couldn't hold a real job. The one who wasted her MIT degree. The one my brother Marcus loved to compare himself against whenever he needed to feel superior. Marcus was the golden child. Harvard MBA. Charismatic. Confident. At 34, he'd built Thompson Ventures into what he called Boston's hottest fintech startup. He appeared in Boston Business Journal. He keynoted at tech conferences. He drove a Tesla and wore custom suits. I was 31, drove a 7-year-old Honda, and wore clothes from Target. I worked from home doing what my family called computer stuff. They didn't ask for details. I didn't offer them. What they didn't know, what I deliberately kept hidden, was that I was a venture capital analyst for Silverton Investment Group, one of the most selective firms in Boston. My specialty was early-stage fintech companies. My track record was exceptional. And in 2018, when Marcus needed angel funding for his startup, I'd been the one to make it happen. Not as his sister Caroline, but through a shell company called Clearwater Holdings LLC. I'd invested $9.2 million of my own money. I'd structured it to remain anonymous. I'd watched from the shadows as Marcus took all the credit, building his empire on my capital while simultaneously mocking my career at every family gathering. I wasn't hiding out of shame. I was watching, testing, documenting. And now, at Christmas dinner 2025, surrounded by my entire extended family, Marcus had decided to publicly destroy me with a private investigator's report. I'd been waiting for this moment for 7 years. The backstory. Our parents, Richard and Patricia Thompson, raised us in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Old money. High expectations. Zero tolerance for mediocrity. Marcus was born to meet those expectations. Star athlete. Student body president. Full scholarship to Harvard. He could walk into a room and own it within minutes. I was different. Quiet. Analytical. Better with numbers than people. I got into MIT on merit, graduated summa cum laude with degrees in computer science and finance, but I didn't have Marcus's charisma. At family dinners, I'd listen while he held court. At holidays, I'd fade into the background while he performed. After college, Marcus went to Harvard Business School. I went to work for a boutique investment firm in Cambridge. Marcus networked at cocktail parties. I analyzed financial models in a quiet office. By 2017, Marcus had an idea for a fintech platform that would revolutionize small business lending. He pitched it to everyone. Most investors passed. Too risky. Too competitive. Unproven founder. But I saw something they didn't. The technical architecture was sound. The market timing was perfect. The regulatory environment was shifting in his favor. It was a legitimate billion-dollar opportunity. There was just one problem, Marcus's ego. At Thanksgiving 2017, I'd suggested he pivot his customer acquisition strategy. I'd done the research. I'd built the models. I knew the data. He'd laughed in my face. Caroline, you work for a firm nobody's heard of doing analysis nobody cares about. I'm building something revolutionary. Why would I take advice from someone who's never built anything? Dad had chuckled. Mom had changed the subject. That night, I made 2 decisions. First, I would fund Marcus's startup anonymously through a shell company. I'd give him the capital he needed to succeed. Not because he deserved it, but because the business model was sound and I'd make money. Second, I would never tell him. I'd let him believe he'd done it all himself. I'd watch him take credit for everything. I'd document every dismissive comment, every condescending remark, every moment he used me as a punchline to elevate himself. And when the time came, I'd show him exactly who he really was. The secret success. In January 2018, I established Clearwater Holdings LLC. The structure was bulletproof. 3 layers of holding companies. Registered in Delaware. Managed through a law firm in Providence. No paper trail leading back to me. I reached out to Marcus's startup through official channels, offering $9.2 million in angel funding. The terms were generous, 35% equity, board observer seat, standard liquidation preferences. I structured it so another analyst at my firm would handle the communication. Marcus never knew I was involved. He announced the funding round at Easter 2018. I closed $9.2 million from a major Boston investor, he'd said, grinning. They recognized my vision when nobody else would. Dad had stood to toast him. Mom had cried with pride. I'd smiled and said, "Congratulations, Marcus. That's wonderful." Nobody asked how I was doing. Over the next 7 years, Thompson Ventures grew exactly as I'd projected. The platform worked. The market responded. By 2024, the company was valued at $87 million. Marcus appeared on Boston's 40 Under 40. He bought a condo in Seaport. He proposed to his girlfriend at a Celtics game. At every family gathering, he'd mention his success. And at every family gathering, he'd make some comment about my little computer job. Still doing data entry, Caroline? Have you thought about getting a real position with growth potential? I could probably get you an entry-level role at my company. If you're interested. I always smiled politely. I never corrected him. I took notes. Meanwhile, my career flourished in ways he couldn't imagine. By 2024, I was a senior partner at Silverton Investment Group. My portfolio was worth $340 million. I'd been featured in Private Equity International. I'd keynoted at Wharton. But I drove my old Honda to family dinners. I wore Target clothes. I let them believe whatever they wanted. I was building something more valuable than wealth. I was building evidence. The inciting incident. Thanksgiving 2025 was the turning point. Marcus had recently closed a $15 million Series B round. Thompson Ventures was on track to hit $120 million valuation. He was negotiating with potential acquirers. Exit was possible within 18 months. He arrived at my parents' house in Wellesley driving a new Porsche. I arrived in my Honda. The family gathered in the living room before dinner. Marcus held court as usual, describing the Series B negotiations, name-dropping investors, talking about potential acquisition offers. Then my Aunt Helen asked me, "Caroline, how's your work going?" Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in. "Caroline's doing great. Still analyzing spreadsheets for that little firm in Cambridge. Very stable work." He smiled condescendingly. "Not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur, right, Caroline? Some people are better suited for support roles." Dad laughed. Uncle Tom nodded knowingly. I smiled. "You're absolutely right, Marcus. We all have our roles." Then Marcus leaned forward, his expression shifting to something darker. "Actually, speaking of roles, I've been thinking about something." He looked at Mom and Dad. "Caroline's been telling people she works in venture capital. She's been implying she's successful. But I've never seen any evidence of it. No portfolio companies. No press. Nothing." Mom frowned. "Caroline, you haven't been lying about your job, have you?" "I work for Silverton Investment Group," I said evenly. "I've been there for 9 years." "Right. But what do you actually do?" Marcus pressed. "Because I've asked around. Nobody in Boston's venture community knows who you are. I prefer to keep a low profile." "Or maybe there's nothing to profile," Marcus said. His voice had an edge now. "Maybe you've been exaggerating your role. Maybe you're not actually successful at all, and you've been letting us believe otherwise." The room went quiet. Dad set down his drink. "Marcus, that's a serious accusation." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I'm going to prove it." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "I've been thinking about this for months. All these vague answers about her job. All this secrecy. It doesn't add up." He looked at me. "So I hired a private investigator. David Chen. Former FBI. The best in Boston." My heart rate didn't change. I'd been expecting this. "I'm going to have him do a complete background investigation," Marcus continued. "Financial records. Employment history. Everything. And at Christmas dinner, he'll present his findings to the whole family. We'll finally know the truth about what Caroline really does." Mom looked concerned. Dad looked intrigued. Aunt Helen looked uncomfortable. I looked at Marcus and smiled. "That sounds reasonable. I have nothing to hide." Marcus grinned triumphantly. "Perfect. Christmas dinner. The whole family. The truth comes out. I nodded. I look forward to it. What Marcus didn't know was that David Chen was thorough. Exceptionally thorough. When you hire the best investigator in Boston to examine someone's life, he doesn't stop at one person's records. He examines everything connected to that person, including shell companies that invested in family members' startups. The preparation. I left Thanksgiving dinner and drove back to my apartment in Cambridge. Not the studio apartment my family assumed I lived in. The 2,400 square foot penthouse overlooking the Charles River that I'd bought in cash in 2021. I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I'd known this moment would come eventually. Marcus's ego wouldn't allow my perceived mediocrity to exist without investigation. He needed to prove his superiority, and the only way to do that was to expose my supposed failures. I'd been preparing for this for 7 years. I opened my secure files. Everything was there. The Clearwater Holdings LLC formation documents. The $9.2 million wire transfer to Thompson Ventures. The equity agreements showing my 35% ownership. The board observer reports I'd received quarterly since 2018. The valuation documents showing Thompson Ventures was now worth $87 million, meaning my stake was worth approximately $30.5 million. I had documentation of every family gathering where Marcus had dismissed my career. I had recordings of his comments about my little computer job. I had emails where he'd offered to get me entry-level work at his company. The company I owned 35% of. The company that only existed because I'd funded it. I also had something else. During my 7 years as board observer, I'd noticed irregularities in Thompson Ventures' financial reporting. Nothing criminal, but definitely concerning. Aggressive revenue recognition. Questionable customer acquisition costs. Expense classifications that inflated EBITDA. Marcus was preparing his company for acquisition. He was making it look more profitable than it actually was. Not fraud, exactly. But aggressive accounting that would concern any serious buyer. I'd documented all of it. Not to use maliciously, but to protect my investment. Now, sitting in my apartment, I made a decision. If Marcus wanted a full investigation, he'd get one. But David Chen was thorough. When he investigated me, he'd follow the money. He'd find Clearwater Holdings. He'd trace the investment to Thompson Ventures. And when he did, his professional ethics would require him to investigate that connection. Which meant he'd examine Thompson Ventures' books. Which meant he'd find the irregularities. I didn't need to do anything except wait. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to my attorney at Silverton Investment Group. Subject line: potential liquidation of Thompson Ventures position. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I had it ready. Christmas dinner. Christmas 2025. My parents' house in Wellesley. The entire extended family. 23 people crowded into the formal dining room. Marcus had insisted on a full family dinner before the presentation. He wanted everyone present. Maximum audience for my humiliation. I arrived at 5 p.m. wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Marcus was already there, wearing a designer suit, standing near the fireplace holding a glass of scotch. A man in his 50s stood beside him, lean, professional, carrying a leather portfolio. David Chen. The private investigator. Marcus saw me and grinned. Caroline. Perfect timing. Everyone's here. He gestured to David. This is David Chen. He's been conducting a comprehensive investigation into your background. He'll be presenting his findings after dinner. I smiled. Hello, Mr. Chen. It's nice to meet you. David nodded politely. His expression was carefully neutral. Professional. We sat down for dinner. Prime rib. Roasted vegetables. Wine. The conversation flowed around me, cousins discussing their jobs, aunts talking about vacation plans, uncles debating the Patriots. Marcus kept glancing at me, anticipating my nervousness. I ate calmly, asked my cousin about her new baby, complimented my aunt's earrings. At 7:30 p.m., after dessert, Marcus stood up. Everyone, can I have your attention please? The room quieted. As most of you know, I've had some concerns about Caroline's career claims. So I hired David Chen, one of Boston's top private investigators, to conduct a thorough background check. David, would you please share what you found? David stood, opening his leather portfolio. His expression was still neutral, but I noticed something in his eyes. Discomfort. Maybe concern. Thank you, Marcus, David said. His voice was measured. I want to begin by saying that this investigation was more complex than I initially anticipated. Marcus smiled. Because she's been lying. Not exactly, David said. The room went very quiet. David pulled out a document. I was hired to investigate Caroline Thompson's professional history and financial status. I did so thoroughly. What I found was... He paused. Surprising. He looked at me. I smiled politely and opened my laptop. Quickly, calmly, I typed an email to my attorney. Retract angel investment from Thompson Ventures. $9.2 million. Effective immediately. Begin liquidation process. I hit send. David continued. Caroline Thompson is a senior partner at Silverton Investment Group, one of Boston's most prestigious venture capital firms. She manages a portfolio valued at approximately $340 million. She's been with the firm for 9 years and has an exceptional track record. Marcus's smile faltered. She's been featured in Private Equity International and spoke at Wharton's VC conference last spring. Her professional credentials are impeccable. Dad leaned forward. Then why hasn't she mentioned any of this? I don't know, David said. But that's not all I found. He pulled out another document. During my investigation, I traced Caroline's financial holdings. She owns property in Cambridge valued at $2.3 million. She has investment accounts totaling approximately $8.7 million. And she's the principal owner of a company called Clearwater Holdings LLC. Marcus frowned. What's Clearwater Holdings? David looked uncomfortable now. That's where things get complicated. Clearwater Holdings is a shell company established in 2018. It made a single major investment. He paused. A $9.2 million angel investment in Thompson Ventures. The room erupted. What? Marcus stood up. Caroline's your angel investor. Dad stared at me. David nodded. According to the equity agreements I obtained, Clearwater Holdings, controlled by Caroline Thompson, owns 35% of Thompson Ventures. Based on the company's most recent valuation of $87 million, her stake is worth approximately $30.5 million. Marcus's face went white. That's impossible. My angel investor is a Boston firm. They are a shell company registered in Delaware, managed through a law firm in Providence, David said. The ultimate beneficial owner is your sister. Mom put her hand over her mouth. Aunt Helen gasped. I took a sip of wine and waited. Marcus stared at me. You've been my investor this whole time? Yes. For 7 years? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I set down my wine glass. You never asked. You assumed I was a failure. You mocked my career at every family gathering. You offered to get me entry-level work at the company I funded. I smiled. I wanted to see how long you'd take credit for building something with my money while simultaneously treating me like I was worthless. The room was completely silent. David cleared his throat. There's something else. Marcus turned to him. What else could there possibly be? David pulled out another folder. His expression was grim. My investigation is required to be thorough. When I discovered Caroline's investment in Thompson Ventures, I examined the company's financial records as part of standard due diligence. And? Marcus's voice was tight. I found irregularities. Aggressive revenue recognition practices. Questionable expense classifications. Customer acquisition costs that don't match industry standards. Nothing criminal, but concerning enough that I'm ethically obligated to report it. Marcus went pale. You can't. I already have, David said. Your lead investor, Beacon Capital, received my report this afternoon. They requested an emergency meeting with your board. It's scheduled for December 27th. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. An email from Beacon Capital's managing partner. Caroline, we need to discuss Thompson Ventures. Urgent. Call me tonight. I looked at Marcus. Your lead investor is calling me. During Christmas dinner. Marcus's hands were shaking. Caroline, you can't pull your investment. The company needs. Needed, I corrected. Past tense. I sent the liquidation order 3 minutes ago. My attorney is filing the paperwork tomorrow morning. Dad stood up. Caroline, this is Marcus's company. His livelihood. You can't just. I can, I said calmly. I'm the majority shareholder through Clearwater Holdings. I have liquidation rights under the original agreement. And after 7 years of listening to Marcus mock my career while building his empire on my capital, I think I've been patient enough. Mom looked at Marcus. Is what David said true? About the financial irregularities? Marcus didn't answer. David spoke quietly. The accounting practices aren't illegal, but they are aggressive. Any serious acquirer will find them during due diligence. Combined with the sudden withdrawal of the angel investor. He trailed off. The acquisition falls apart, I finished. The Series B investors panic. The company value collapses. Marcus sat down heavily. His face was ashen. Uncle Tom spoke up. Caroline, be reasonable. He's your brother. I looked at Uncle Tom. He hired an investigator to publicly humiliate me at Christmas dinner. He spent 7 years dismissing my career while secretly relying on my capital. He called me a liar in front of the entire family. I smiled. I think I'm being extremely reasonable. I could have exposed this years ago. I waited. Aunt Helen looked at Marcus. Why would you do that? Hire an investigator against your own sister. Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the table. My phone buzzed again. Another email. This one from Thomson Ventures CFO. Caroline, Beacon Capital is threatening to pull the Series B. They found irregularities in our books. We need to talk immediately. I showed the screen to Marcus. Your CFO is panicking. Marcus looked up at me. For the first time in 7 years, I saw something other than condescension in his eyes. Fear. Caroline, please, he said quietly. Don't do this. Why not? Because we're family. I stood up, closing my laptop. We're family when you need my money, Marcus. But when you thought I was nobody, I wasn't worth listening to. When you thought I was mediocre, I was worth mocking. For 7 years, you used me as evidence of your superiority. I picked up my coat. Now you know the truth. Your angel investor was the sister you dismissed. Your success was built on capital from the person you called a failure. And the investigation you ordered to humiliate me just destroyed everything you built. I walked toward the door. Marcus stood. Where are you going? I have calls to make. Beacon Capital wants to discuss Thomson Ventures' future. Your CFO needs guidance on the liquidation process. And I have other portfolio companies that actually appreciate my investment. I paused at the doorway. Enjoy the rest of your Christmas, Marcus. I suspect the next few weeks will be difficult for you. I left. Behind me, I heard the explosion of voices. Mom crying. Dad demanding explanations. Aunts and uncles arguing. And Marcus, silent, realizing that the investigator he'd hired to expose my failures had instead exposed his entire foundation was built on a lie. The aftermath. The next 72 hours moved quickly. December 26th, Beacon Capital called an emergency board meeting. David Chen's report on Thomson Ventures' accounting practices had triggered a comprehensive audit. They found exactly what I'd documented over 7 years: aggressive revenue recognition, inflated customer metrics, questionable expense classifications. Nothing criminal. But enough to concern serious investors. The acquisition negotiations collapsed immediately. No buyer would proceed with those irregularities unresolved. December 27th, I received formal notice from Thomson Ventures board. They were requesting I reconsider the liquidation. They offered to restructure my position, increase my equity, give me a board seat. I declined. December 28th, the Series B investors demanded repayment terms. Without the angel funding stable, without acquisition prospects, without clean accounting, Thomson Ventures' valuation plummeted. From $87 million to approximately $31 million in 72 hours. Marcus's stake, once worth approximately $28 million, was now worth about $10 million. And falling.my phone rang constantly. Marcus called 16 times. I didn't answer. My parents called, demanding I fix this. I politely declined. Aunt Helen called, asking if I was okay. I told her I was fine. Marcus finally reached me on December 29th by showing up at my apartment building. Security called me from the lobby. There's a Marcus Thompson here to see you, Miss Thompson. Should I send him up? I considered. Yes. 3 minutes later, Marcus knocked on my door. I opened it. He looked terrible. Unshaven. Rumpled clothes. Dark circles under his eyes. Nice place, he said quietly, looking at my penthouse. Thank you. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Marcus walked into my living room, taking in the expensive furniture. The original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. This was the apartment he didn't know existed, in the building he'd never visited, evidence of the success he'd never acknowledged. How long have you lived here? He asked. 4 years. Why didn't you tell us? You never asked. You assumed I lived in a studio apartment. I let you believe it. Marcus sat down heavily on my couch. The company's collapsing. The Series B investors are threatening to sue. Beacon Capital pulled out. The acquisition is dead. My CFO quit yesterday. I know. Caroline, you're destroying everything I built. I sat across from him. No, Marcus. I'm withdrawing capital from a company I funded. There's a difference. It's my company. Built with my money. Valued because of connections I didn't make through you. Successful because the business model I analyzed was sound. I leaned forward. You took credit for everything while dismissing the person who made it possible. That's not building something. That's performing. Marcus's jaw tightened. So this is revenge? Because I hurt your feelings. No. This is consequences. You hired an investigator to publicly humiliate me at a family dinner. You spent 7 years mocking my career. You called me a liar. I smiled. You got exactly what you asked for, the truth. You just didn't like what the truth revealed. I'm your brother. And you treated me like I was worthless. For 7 years. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want? Nothing from you. There must be something. Some way to fix this. I considered. Actually, there is one thing. Name it. I want you to understand what you did. Not just the dismissive comments or the mockery. I want you to understand that you built your entire identity on being superior to me, and you did it by standing on a foundation I provided while pretending I contributed nothing. Marcus looked at the floor. I gave you $9.2 million when no other investor would touch you, I continued. I structured it anonymously because I knew your ego couldn't handle owing your success to your mediocre sister. I watched you take credit for everything while treating me like I was nobody. And when you decided to publicly destroy me to prove your superiority, you hired an investigator who revealed the truth you were too arrogant to see. I stood up. That's not revenge, Marcus. That's irony. Marcus looked up at me. Is there any way to save the company? Possibly. You'd need to clean up the accounting immediately. Bring in a reputable CFO. Be completely transparent with your remaining investors. Rebuild credibility from scratch. Will you stay invested? No. Why not? Because I don't invest in people who treat others as inferior. It's bad business. I walked to the door. You can fix your company, Marcus. You're smart enough. But you'll do it without my capital, without my connections, and without the safety net you didn't know you had. Marcus stood slowly. What do I tell Mom and Dad? Tell them the truth. Tell them their golden child built his empire on his mediocre sister's money. Tell them the investigation they approved destroyed what I created. Tell them everything. I opened the door. Marcus walked out, then paused. I'm sorry. For what specifically? He thought about it. For not seeing you. That's a start. He left. I closed the door and returned to my living room, looking out over the Charles River. My phone buzzed with another email from Beacon Capital. They wanted to discuss a new investment opportunity. A biotech startup. Series A round. $15 million needed. I opened my laptop and began my analysis. Epilogue, 6 months later. June 2026. Thompson Ventures survived, barely. Marcus cleaned up the accounting, brought in a proper CFO, and restructured the company with his remaining investors. The valuation stabilized around $35 million. Not the unicorn exit he'd imagined, but solvent. He sold his Porsche. Moved to a smaller apartment. Learned to operate without the capital cushion he'd never known he had. We don't speak regularly. But we're not enemies. At Mom's birthday dinner in May, Marcus introduced me to his new investors as my sister Caroline, who's a senior partner at Silverton Investment Group. Not my sister who does computer stuff. Not my sister who works in data entry. My actual title. It was small. But it was something. My parents still don't fully understand what happened. They know I invested in Marcus's company. They know I'm successful. But the nuance, the 7 years of deliberate deception, the strategic patience, the careful documentation, that's still beyond their grasp. That's fine. I didn't do this for their understanding. I did it to answer a question I'd been asking myself since Thanksgiving 2017. What happens when you give someone everything while letting them believe they earned it themselves? Answer: they become exactly what they accuse you of being. Marcus called me a liar while building his truth on my foundation. He called me a failure while succeeding with my capital. He called me mediocre while I quietly outperformed him at every level. The private investigator he hired didn't expose my lies. He exposed Marcus's. And sometimes, that's exactly what justice looks like. I drive my Honda to family dinners now. I wear clothes from Target. I let people make assumptions. But I also have a penthouse in Cambridge, a portfolio worth $340 million, and the satisfaction of knowing that when my family finally decided to investigate my worth, they discovered I'd been holding up their golden child the entire time. I wasn't hiding my success. I was just waiting to see how long it would take them to notice. Turns out, 7 years and 1 private investigator. Worth every minute.